Darce, I'd like to ask you about the Long March of 1974 to Northwest Cape. Can you explain how that developed, what some of the aims of the march were, and what your role personally was in the march?
Yes, actually there were two marches. We had the Long March and the Quick March. And the Quick March was the one that took the short route, took 2 weeks, and the Long March took 3 weeks. And I suppose we chose names like that because we wanted to dramatise it. It was at a time when the left was tending to lose focus. We'd all been united around the war in Vietnam. The Vietnamese people had won that war. The left in Australia had done their little bit to contribute. But what was tending to happen at the time, and everything was becoming diffuse, and we felt, well, we're all working bloody hard, all, away in the suburbs or in our little group, but we're not really getting very far or making some overall impact. And lots of us had discussed this. I'd talked it with people. I'm sure that similar conversations were going round all around Australia. But I mean, the group of people I was mixed up with said, well, why don't we do something that will focus it? And we said, what? And I don't quite know where the idea first came from, but I remembered the Aboriginal Freedom Ride that I'd been on in 1965, where with Charles Perkins, a group of students from Sydney University went around and the outback of New South Wales in a bus and desegregated hotels and swimming pools and made a fair deal of splash and actually did make, a little impact on things, particularly in raising the consciousness of Aboriginal people that change was actually possible. I mean, we're a whole lot of white middle-class students and we went around and waved our placards and drove our bus through towns on a cloud of dust and all that and made some headlines, and we all went off, back to university or on to be doctors and lawyers or whatever, most of the people there did. But the interesting thing about that was that it did make the impact among the blacks, and then they later on picked it up. They saw that change was possible and picked up the struggle, and things came from that. And I suppose what struck me out of all that was not only was it a reasonably effective political action, but it was also a lot of fun. And we'd been through a whole lot of hard yakka in the 60s and 70s, and we wanted to get something going again, and we thought, all right, this can be an effective political action, and it's a way to see the country. We're going to, drive all the way to Northwest Cape, so let's sort of start it on that basis. So that's why we picked names like the Quick March and the Long March, in a sense out of respect for what the Long March had really been, but also there's a little bit of a send-up in it too.
That was the Mao Zedong Long March to China.
Yeah, and the Quick March was the sort of the send-up side of it. So we did it in that way, that it was going to appeal to a number of people who may not have had, a heavy commitment to the left. And we wanted to dramatise things. At that time, the CPA-ML was taking a very nationalistic, Australian independence line. I was, at that stage, following along. I never a member of that party, and a number of us were, and we saw that as a way of both pushing the political point of the Americans, the superpower rivalry, and also the question of Australian independence, getting American bases out of Australia. So it happened to suit preoccupations of the time. So we decided to get this going, and we dramatised it in ways like claiming to have found the peppercorn, because the Americans actually rented Northwest Cape for one peppercorn. I managed to get from the ABC archives the actual film of Mr. Ed Clark, who we used to call the talking ambassador. This terrible used car salesman that Johnson had appointed as American ambassador here, actually presenting the peppercorn to Harold Holt. So we actually, went down the supermarket and bought a packet of peppercorns and picked out one that looked slightly rounder than the rest and had it encased in perspex and sort of mounted. And we announced to the world at large that this was the peppercorn that we had, got from a file in the Defence Department. And we were threatening, righto, we're going to take their rent back and we're going to claim the land back. So there's a fair amount of bullshit about it like that. But it did something to pick up things, to enthuse people. And so we managed to get buses coming from Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. So we had 4, coaches, as well as several minibuses and motorbikes and cars and whatever. Quite a convoy of people that went across.
A lot of people would not be aware that there is this tradition of protest against North West Cape. I mean, Pine Gap's had a lot more attention and publicity. I'm interested in why you chose North West Cape when it was so much further to go, particularly from the eastern states. Was it perhaps because there'd been a lot of attention drawn to North West Cape the year before, in 1973, when the base was put on a red alert during the Arab-Israeli war?
No, I think there were 2 motives. One, we went there simply because it was further away, and we thought, let's be bold, let's be daring, let's do something a bit, more outrageous. But more particularly, the reason was a number of us that had been involved in the campaign against Omega. That had been supposed to be going down in Tasmania, then it was going to go up in the Riverina, and finally went into Gippsland. And of course, like Omega, North West Cape is a VLF facility. Omega's a VLF beacon. This is a VLF communications base. It was essentially concerned with, giving commands to nuclear submarines. And it happened to have the advantage that it dramatised the struggle against Omega. We had always found the Omega struggle very difficult in Australia. We'd studied the New Zealand experience closely, where the New Zealand people had been successful in getting Omega kicked out of there. But the Omega thing had been difficult to explain to the Australian people. It had never taken off as an issue in the same way that it did in New Zealand. And we figured if we could make that link, because of course North West Cape and Omega are the 2 sides of the same coin. Omega's function, or indeed one of its functions, was to give the submarines the information they needed to fire their missiles accurately. Unless they know precisely where they are, they can't hit the target precisely. It was North West Cape, of course, that was to tell them who to shoot and when. So we saw that link.
That's interesting. The journey itself, which I assume you were involved in,
Yep.
How long did it take to reach your destination?
It took 3 weeks by the long march, 2 weeks by the quick. The long march was deliberately slow because, again, taking a leaf out of Mao Zedong's book, we designed that as not simply, it was more important to journey than arrive in many senses. So we had a street theatre troupe. Just about every bus that went had its own street theatre troupe. Ours was Uncle Sam and Waltzing Matilda. And, we had this little play we'd put on. And essentially we were taking the message into the countryside to people who'd not received... demonstrations, marches were to a penny in the city. The message had been got to a lot of city people. A lot of country people never directly saw the message of the left. They only received it through television or radio or the newspapers. So I said, all right, let's take it out directly. So we were there, very much organised. Again, on a similar basis to the Freedom Ride, that in the Freedom Ride in 65, we did a lot of, walking around the towns talking to people. So we did the same thing. Whenever we came into a town, we would... someone would get in the bus with the loudhailer. I used to do a bit of that. I'd stand up the front, I had one of those portable loudhailers, and stand in the front door of the bus, and we'd drive around the town, and it'd spruik around, we've got street theatre, every hour on the steps of the post office or outside the civic centre or wherever it was. And as some people were going around sort of spruiking through the loudhailer, others were going out door knocking, asking questionnaires, taking petitions, anything to sort of get to the people. So...
Is it true that Uncle Sam actually got arrested on one occasion?
I think Uncle Sam got arrested more than once. That was Bruce Cornwall, who his most spectacular arrest, not here, was I think at one of the spring a tennis match where there were South Africans playing, and he actually sort of ran onto the field right in front of the net, and he was sort of arrested so many times I think he's lost count. But
you also had an interesting experience with the police at Carnarvon. Can you remember that? That was the satellite tracking station south of...
Yes, I don't remember the police at Carnarvon. We of course had an interesting experience with the police at North West Cape itself. I don't remember that particular incident. Maybe it might have been another bus. No, we did travel in convoy by then. We were all together by then. That's...
Sure. You went to some of the places you visited on your journey were US bases, were they?
Yeah. Basically, on the way, we attempted to identify anything that was a US base or related to American facilities. So the Coburn Sound Naval Base near Perth, we naturally demonstrated at. The Smithfield, just outside of Adelaide, we searched around but never managed to find. But it's only a little, laboratory. It's not really a base, but it just happened to be of particular strategic importance because it does geodesic work, which is important for mapping the shape of the Earth and therefore, accurately firing nuclear missiles. So again, it was an attempt to sort of identify. At Mildura, there was a weather balloon station that we identified, and all of these things that, in some senses are just, appear to be innocent scientific stations. But the question of nuclear war is so all-pervasive that so many branches of science relate to it, that it was true to say that balloon weather station was doing significant war-related work, as was the Smithfield Geodesic Centre.
A lot of this would have been news to people on the left and certainly to the general public that there were so many US bases in Australia. I mean, I think at one count there were something like 33 at that time.
That was the figure we used to quote, and I think maybe we were gilding the lily a bit, and that some were things, just like weather observation things, and whether you really actually call that a base or not is arguable, but certainly there was, nuclear war-related work being carried out on at least 33 sites.
This was, of course, before the days of community radio, which only came about 2 or 3 years later. What was being done on the bus trip to get the message out and to get the news and information back to the capital cities? Anything? Or?
Yes, well, we had a number of tactics. I mean, one of them was, just sort of physically being there in a country town, physically door knocking, handing out leaflets, street theatre, and of course the other thing was our record. Peter Bell recorded some anti-nuclear songs, a Stop Amiga song. We had also on it the famous speech by Mr. Ed, the talking ambassador, handing back the peppercorn that most people would not believe was true. They said it was faked. We had an actor pretending to be the American ambassador, and I still have the film of it, it's dead true. So basically when we went into all these country towns, one of the first things we'd do, we'd go to the local commercial radio station and say, hey, look, we're a bunch of sort of strange-looking people coming through. Do you want to interview us and play our record? And it's amazing how many of them gave it a go.
So generally you got a good reception in these places?
Yes. I mean, it's often said that country people are very conservative, and I think socially they probably are. But they also tend to be very curious. They don't get the same range of information as people in the city were. So people really were prepared to listen and talk to you. I mean, you had to convince them. But so often in the city, you're holding a demonstration, people brush by, they don't want to know. There people were curious and wanted to engage you in conversation, and I found it very worthwhile.
How many buses actually made this trip?
We had 4 coaches, the full bit. We had 2 minibuses that would take about 10 people each. And then we had a number of, Land Rovers and private cars and I think a few motorbikes that came up from Perth. So altogether, I think we had about 200 odd people on it. Basically, a little travelling circus for 3 weeks. We carried everything with us. We had all our own tents, all our own sleeping gear, our own eating utensils. Basically, we ate that terrible Rosella campers food stuff, because driving across the Nullarbor, I mean, that was before it was bitumenised and all of that. You couldn't keep fresh food, so basically we sort of mixed up this gunk every night that we ate, and when we came to a major capital city we'd buy crates of oranges and a bit of fresh meat or whatever. But most of the time we sort of lived off this campus type food in tents. We became very expert at putting up and pulling down tents quickly. And I suppose the other interesting thing that came out of it, and something I got a lot of out of the Freedom Ride as well, was the way we organised the buses. Each bus has a microphone on it. Basically, normally this is a tourist bus, and this is where the bus driver gets on the microphone and tells all pensioners, this is the historic site we're passing and whatever. But of course we were able to use that, put on a long cord and use it for political debate. And as we would travel, hours and hours and hours through the day, the analysis of what we'd seen, what we're going to do, was debated on the people on the bus. So each bus was sort of self-governing. Each bus had a convener or a committee or something or other. I think there were sort of 3 people to the bus who were the sort of bus representatives. And then when we would have, there were a few all-in general meetings we had of 200 odd people, but they became difficult to hold, in the middle of the bush somewhere and whatever. So very often the conveners would get together.
Were there Aboriginals on the bus?
Yes, a number who, naturally enough, saw the question of land rights related to the question of the Americans. I mean, they took a much more uncompromising stand. It wasn't only the we in one sense were concerned about the Americans taking over this country. The Aborigines, of course, had that done already. Ambrose Golden Brown was a wonderfully cheeky leader of the Aboriginal group on the bus I was on. There were sort of 5 or 6 there, and I'd always remember Ambrose when we crossed the border into Western Australia. The press met us at the border, and this is a fairly thick journalist from the West Australian, concerned about getting the facts right, and he was interviewing myself as the leader of the bus and Ambrose as the leader of the black group on the bus. And he wanted to know our names and occupations and all that, and he wrote it down in his book, and of course he found it very difficult to cope with Ambrose Golden Brown. And he said, Ambrose Golden Brown. Yous give it me, said Ambrose. I said, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, yous give it me. Sorry. This is the name you white fellas gave me. And he couldn't cope with him because he said, where do you come from? And he says, Australia. Yes, but what part? He said, we blacks, it's just my country. I don't know, Sydney, Melbourne, they're white fellas' names. And so, this poor guy just couldn't cope with this.
You must have felt fairly apprehensive when you approached Exmouth, because it does have a reputation for being a redneck town and a godforsaken sort of area. Did you feel that there might be trouble when you arrived?
Yes, we thought there might, but a few of us, there'd been 3 of us who'd done a reconnaissance 3 or 4 months earlier, so I'd actually been up in January and spied it out. Yes, in a sense, a lot of people there, of course, depended on the town. Were it not for the base, it would be no more than a fishing village. So naturally enough, a lot of people's livelihood was tied up in it. But when we'd done the reconnaissance there, we'd found a couple of people who were sympathetic to the cause, who'd helped put us up, who'd given us information, so it wasn't a totally redneck town. When we got there, of course, the people that were most delighted to see us were not the natives of the town, but they were the Marines. They all thought Go Home Yank was a wonderful slogan. That's precisely where they wanted to go. They were absolutely sick of it. They were stuck out there, and a large number of them that were black. They were in the Marines or the Navy or whatever branch of the service they were in, essentially because of unemployment at home. They were stuck in this hellhole, and anyone that was going to come around and provide some music. I mean, we held a peace concert in the caravan park, and a whole lot of the Marines came from the base. They took our Eureka flag and hoisted it over the over the base. I mean, the commandant couldn't work out how those Australians got in there and hoisted their flag, because we didn't. It was their own troops who'd done it. So there was an incredible amount of support from them. In fact, I can remember one of them getting drunk and saying, I know where there's some dynamite and we can blow up one of the towers, and we had to sort of cool him down and saying, no, you'll blow yourself up.
The fact that you were, I don't mean yourself personally, but the fact that most people who went on the the trip would have been very critical of the Soviet Union's role, would have helped to disarm the usual criticism that protesters against US bases are merely serving the Russians.
Yes, I mean the Maoist politics of a lot of the people associated with it, and that wasn't, of course, everyone. I think the initiative and the leadership came from there, but the political complexion of those travelling varied considerably, and indeed varied from city to city. I don't know that, I mean, that was true. We took a very strong stand against the Soviet Union, but I'm not sure that, how clearly that got through to a lot of the ordinary people. Certainly the Russian Bear was a character that figured in the little street theatre, Uncle Sam waltzing Matilda and the Russian Bear.
There were New Zealanders on the trip?
Yes, there'd been a close association with the New Zealanders because of our experience over Omega. I mean, the New Zealanders were successful in getting it chucked out of their country and onto ours, so I think a number of them felt a bit guilty about that, and as a result had done a lot to assist the Australian anti-Omega movement. So when we were organising this, they were invited. Owen Wilkes in particular, who had been one of the leading lights in the opposition to Omega in New Zealand, had done an awful lot of research work and in many senses provided a lot of the information background until people here began to do their own reading and their own research and bone up on it. It was Owen's knowledge that a lot of people depended on.
You said that you were one of the people who went to have a look at the base, to have a look over the base as preparation for the protest. What were your initial impressions of the place? Were you awe-inspired, or was it?
No. It was it was a long, flat bit of land, a lot of tall towers around everywhere. It's a radio station. I work in radio, and it was simply a radio station with a lot of masts. It was a particularly powerful one. Its design enabled its waves to penetrate seawater. It was specifically designed for communicating with nuclear submarines. But it was fairly innocent looking, despite all the sort of warning signs around and don't take photographs and don't do this or that. We took all sort of photographs. We walked all over the place. No one bothered us. Hey, in a sense, people, it's like generals always fight in the last war. A lot of people tend to see, this, even civilians see this war in terms of last. So when you think of a base, you think of barbed wire and machine guns and troops and all of that. And essentially what you had there was electronic equipment and people in white coats and overalls, and it's nonetheless deadly for all of that.
So it was easy to penetrate, very easy to get into. So what actually happened when you finally arrived? Was the intention to carry out some form of direct action? Were you prevented from doing that? And what was the reaction of the locals to that activity?
The locals were sort of hostile, as you would expect, but not particularly violent. I remember at one stage a few people came round and gave us a bit of trouble in the caravan park, but nothing, for example, like the Freedom Ride in '65, where our lives really were threatened and where the bus was driven off the road and people were sort of beaten up and whatever. This was mainly confined, to a bit of simple abuse, probably no worse than you receive if you're in a demonstration in the city. Yes, I suppose on the question of direct action, yes, we'd seen that, we'd intended that. But I don't think anybody seriously thought that we could actually take over the base or close it down or anything like that. So it was a matter of dramatising the issue. So we had several marches out there. We sort of deliberately broke. The Defence Forces Special Undertakings Act is a most horrific piece of legislation that, taken literally, means that anybody who walked onto the perimeter of the base, which most of us did at some time or other, could literally be locked away for 20 years and in secret, because it provided that, almost like the Israeli actions against Mordecai Vanunu, the sort of provisions that Israel has in fact applied against him, and you're not allowed to say certain things in court. All those things are there in the Australian Act, and they can even prohibit publication of the fact that you have even been arrested. So legally, it would have been impossible for them to have arrested all 200 of us, shut us up for 20 years and forbidden everybody to ever talk about it. Politically, of course, that wasn't going to happen. It wasn't that kind of direct threat. So what we did do is broke the law, went onto the base, got arrested, burnt the American flag, demanded to see, again, with a fair deal of humour.
Threw the peppercorn over the fence.
Threw the peppercorn over the fence. We asked the American commander to come out and take his peppercorn back, and we said, now here's your peppercorn, we're being fair, we'll give you a peppercorn back, you give us our land back. The Aborigines stood up there and made their speeches to sort of similar effect, and the Marine Guards looked there, said nothing. And when he didn't come after a due period of time, someone picked up the peppercorn and its bit of perspex and chucked it over the fence. Whereupon we then, burned the American flag and howled and hooted and whatever. And I think it served its point of dramatising the base. But a lot of that would have had fairly limited effect had we not done the softening up process beforehand. I mean, had we just gone there without any preparation and just sort of torn over to New South Wales, Northwest Cape, got 200 people there, shook our fists and burnt a few flags and chucked a few peppercorns, it would have amounted to little. It was because there was a lot of preparation work, a lot of pre-demonstrations, all of the things are stopping off in the towns in the way was meant to sort of soften it up and see that final gesture, and that's really all it was, as part of an ongoing campaign.
Apparently, the international media coverage wasn't all that bad. He got into Newsweek. There was an article in Newsweek, or on the front cover of Newsweek, there was a picture of
the photograph of the flag burning, I think. Yeah.
So, was it regarded by the organisers as a successful operation?
As relatively successful, although I think looking back on it, the sad thing about it was that it started with a fair degree of impetus, but after we got back and everybody collapsed after 3 weeks of sleeping on hard floors and all of this sort of stuff, the campaign quietened down again, and the impetus really wasn't kept up. It was sort of lost for a while. I know that, since then other groups have drawn attention to other bases. There have been several trips to Pine Gap and whatever, but for a while it faded. I like to think that it sort of kept the spark alive a little bit, but it never took off as much as I would have liked to or hoped.
Yeah, there was a fair gap there, 6-7 years, or at least. Some of that perhaps may have been due to the fact that the government perhaps successfully sanitised some of the operations of Northwest Cape. Barnard went to the US in 73, I think, or early 74, which was not long before your Long March, and arranged for some spurious Australian control, or joint control, which would have taken the sting a little bit, perhaps, out of it, because before that it was quite unequivocally an American base, even American territory, sovereign American territory.
Yeah.
Can you remember whether that had much effect in sanitising the place? Or?
Maybe it had some effect, of course. That was pretty meaningless, joint Australian control, because the Australians never had any access to the code room or to the content of the messages being sent. Australia could, in theory, tell it to switch off. But, of course, unless you know what's being said and what it's actually doing, having the power to actually, physically pull the plug doesn't mean all that much. It's too drastic a power. And given, of course, the relationship between Australia and the United States, whether you even really had that or not, I would doubt. Yes, I think the Whitlam-Barnard government was intelligent in the way that handled it. They didn't overreact. They let the thing be, a bit of a 9-day wonder. And it was hard to keep the interest up, partly because, of course, it is so remote, and the others are so remote. And the same thing happened with Amiga, which all along we had seen as being the much more winnable thing. I mean, I don't think we really thought that we're actually seriously going to get this one closed down. What we did think was very much achievable was to stop Amiga actually getting built. And part of that was the attempt to draw attention to the whole interwoven complex of American nuclear-related installations in Australia.
But Omega issue was quite an issue within the Victorian ALP, I believe.
Oh, it was, and it was an issue in the Tasmanian ALP. I mean, the Tasmanians succeeded in getting it out of Tasmania, and it got shunted around all over the place. After New Zealand, Tasmania was the next most logical place to put it. Technically, Amiga needed to be as far east and south as you could get it in this Australasian region, and the South Island of New Zealand would have been ideal. Failing that, then Tasmania or Macquarie Island or somewhere like that was ideal. Well, it would have been too expensive to put it on Macquarie Island. There really were attempts to put it in Tasmania, but again, with Tasmania being a close, tightly knit community, both the Liberal Premier Angus Bethune at the time and later on the Labor Premier said, no, not in our state. And it got moved off to Gippsland successfully because it got put into a fairly remote and underpopulated part of Gippsland where Charlie Jones, who was then the ALP Minister for Transport, managed to con people down there and the damn thing can be a tourist attraction. And that was very sad that we lost out on that one. I think, had they tried to put it into a more populous and tightly knit community, we could have got rid of it.
There were a number of publications, like I've seen one called Pack Your Bags, Sam, associated with the anti-bases campaign at that time. We've talked about the Long March, and we've talked a little bit about the Omega campaign. Was there much of a structure there to this campaign? I mean, you said you used the phrase yourself, 9-day wonder. I wondered whether that in fact was what this Long March was. I mean, I'm sure it took a lot of organisation. But was there a structure, was there an organisation apart from the publication that came in?
Yes, indeed, and I was being unfair to say a 9-day wonder, although I think it had an element of that about it. Yes, there was an ongoing organisation, the Campaign Against Foreign Military Bases in Australia. It essentially got going with the Stop Amiga Committee, and that's something that began earlier. The Campaign Against Foreign Military Bases in Australia was a broader outfit that took its name from the New Zealand organisation, the Campaign Against Foreign Military Bases in New Zealand. And that began to broaden the issue out from just Amiga to look at the whole American presence here. And that organisation was quite strong in Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney for a couple of years. I always remember being attacked by Joe Owens, who was then the treasurer of the Builders Labourers in New South Wales, where I'd had some association with people like Norm Gallagher down here, and I was working up in Sydney at the time. And I remember Joe running around telling people I was up there, I'd been sent up by Gallagher to take over the New South Wales branch of the BLF, despite the fact that I'd never been a builder's labourer in my life and I wouldn't know what to do with a brick if I saw one. And he said, no, he's here tonight. I hadn't been friendly with I was drinking in the pub with a girlfriend of Joe's. And she dropped me back at my place one night in Sydney and went home to find Joe in her dining room, walking up and down, pacing up and down. This bastard Cassidy's up there. Gallagher sent him up to take us over. He's holding this meeting in Roseville now, working out how to... And he said, he's not doing any such thing. He's been in the pub for the last 3 hours. He's not fit for any meeting. Besides, but it just dropped him home. What it wasn't Tuesday nighting in Roseville. It was Thursday night in Rozelle, and I was there organising a meeting of the Campaign Against Foreign Military Bases. So yes, the organisation was very active in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. There was some activity in Brisbane and Canberra and Perth. And it went on over, I suppose it remained strong for a couple of years. We held a number of rock festivals, bring your own rock.
Did that survived the North West Cape Long March, did it? That campaign, that organisation?
For about a year or so after the event, but I suppose it was stronger before in a way that the Long March, was the peak of it, and after that it began to sort of fade away a bit. But yes, it was a long process organising it. We could have been, a year.
Do you feel after 14 years that there is more awareness in Australia amongst the Australian population today than there was then about the functions of these places?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think that names like Pine Gap, North West Cape are pretty well known among, politically literate people. And indeed, I think nowadays most people have a reasonably clear idea about what they do. Probably more so about Pine Gap, actually, than the North West Cape. But certainly I think there is a lot more knowledge and less mystery about it.
Yes, I think that we have to really admire the guts and audacity of the people who went up there, because they were path breakers in a sense. I think it was the first direct action of any major kind at any foreign military base in Australia that I know of, and or was it? I suppose there may have been actions against Omega.
Oh, there were anti-Omega actions of various kinds, but since it really wasn't built then, we could demonstrate outside a farmer's paddock. But
how are we going for time? We've still got.
We're
still on the ones.
Okay, we're rolling.
And a funny story?
Oh, there were a number, of course. Two that I remember were the enormous range of ages. We had Jim, I forget his surname, Jim Andrews, who was the fairy floss monopolist of New Zealand. He owned all the fairy floss stands in New Zealand, which was one.
That's for real?
For real. He grew up, working in shows and things, and he was also the man who introduced hamburgers to New Zealand, because when the American troops came over in the war, Jim was always out, for making a buck here or there, and the Yanks showed him how to make hamburgers, good hamburgers with fresh chilies in them. And he was 78, I think, when he came, and he sort of still survived by selling fairy floss in Nelson, which is a little seaside town in the north of the South Island of New Zealand. So he was the oldest person there, and he had an amazing appetite. And of course, most of the time we were, eating this terrible dried food stuff. And Jim would always be stopping at fast food outlets and stoking himself up on chips and Chico rolls and all this rubbish. I think our youngest participant was about 4, so we had really everything between 4 and in the 70s. And the other thing I remember is the deal we did with the magistrate. After a lot of people had been arrested in Exmouth, they were all in the back of the police cells, kicking up a hell of a din. And I had carefully not got arrested because I had all the bail money. I was sort of wearing an army shirt. And it had been rumoured that they were going to charge a lot of money to get people out. So I think we cleaned out the banks. I think I had $40,000 in cash on me. And I had both pockets bulging with bills. And in the end, the magistrate came out and he said, "Look, I'll do a deal with you. I'll bail them and I'll do them sort of 4 at a time if you can get them to shut up. Otherwise, I'll do them 1 at a time, and it'll take all day and they'll have to stay there." So I had to was escorted into the cells to sort of put this to the people. And of course, like so many things on the Long March, this couldn't be decided simply. It had to be put to a democratic vote, and so there was everybody in the cells having a political meeting, whether they were going to compromise and do this deal with the authorities and get out quickly, or whether they were going to kick up a stink and yell and chant and scream and go out slowly. So in the end, rationality won, and they accepted the deal, and everybody got bailed, and in fact they got out for reasonable amounts of money, like $80 or $100 or something, not $1,000 each or whatever, which we'd been fearing. Didn't
hit anybody with the Special Undertakings Act?
No.
Yeah.
No, obviously they'd got their writing instructions from the federal government to cool it.
Right.